I'm Nick Smith, a professor in the Department of Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences, and I've put together this short video introduction to a course that I'm offering on infant language development. So my hope is to give you an overview of the goals of the course, the questions that we're going to be asking, and how we're going to be doing our work. Finally, what are the learning outcomes for this course? So the first thing that makes infant language development so interesting as a topic is a fundamental juxtaposition between two ideas. The first is that spoken language is so complex and variable. So there are thousands of languages in the world today, and each of them has a complex acoustic, phonetic, and grammatical structure. And our experience with these languages can be messy and variable. The same words or phrase can be totally different depending on the talker and the context. Words in speech don't have silences or spaces between them like they do in text. So even figuring out where words begin and end could be a challenge. Nevertheless, most infants learn to speak and understand in a seemingly effortless way, really quickly from scratch. So the overarching question is, how do infants do this? To understand this, we'll be focusing on 4 different sub-areas or modules. The first module is a foundation on developmental theory and neuroscience. So language ability obviously depends on brains. And so understanding how brains develop during infancy is really important. So one of the key ideas that will emerge from this section is that brains just don't mature with age, but rather they're shaped by environmental influences. And so in this second section, we will focus on the infant's language environment. What is the speech and language input that infants experience? Here we'll look not only at the acoustical auditory properties of language, but visual speech, gesture, and sign, and how they are combined into a multisensory audiovisual signal. A major part of infants' language environment is the home and interaction with caregivers, who provide speech that is, in a sense, optimized for infants. So we'll talk a lot about infant-directed speech, how it's different from adult-directed speech. And in the context of what we've covered in the first module on brain development, we'll discuss the importance of the quantity and quality of the input, as well as the impact of deprivation during critical and sensitive periods. In the third module, we'll focus on the development of infants' ability to understand spoken language. One of the big challenges here is being able to figure out what infants can actually perceive. We can't just ask them. So researchers have developed a number of clever methods to use infants' natural behaviors to give us clues about how they experience the world, even in utero. With these methods, we can then ask specific questions about how they perceive and process specific features of the aspects of their native language. In the final module, we turn to infants' emerging ability to take an active role in communication, with a focus on their speech production abilities, beginning with babbling. And as now active participants in communication, infants engage in interaction and dialogue, even in rudimentary form. In this course, we'll be talking a lot about individual primary sources and research studies, but these 2 summaries will be useful to help integrate the pieces. The first is a book on infant speech development by Peter Jusek. The second is a wonderful review article by Patricia Kuhl. The best part of this article is really this figure that I've shown here that provides a sort of roadmap to speech development within the first year. And we're going to be referring to this roadmap consistently throughout the course. So I've got 7 kids myself, and I can confidently say that the language development is literally the most interesting thing about watching kids grow up. That's why parents go nuts over the first words and the funny things that they say. One of my kids thought that Parmesan cheese was somehow 2 different things. This is the parmes and this is the cheese. It sounds sort of crazy, but it's a word segmentation error that has some logic to it. Someday, when something like this happens to you, you'll know why. And so the learning outcomes for this course are the goals of the course are to enable you to understand what's going on under the hood, to understand the neuronal processes, how they interact with the environmental factors to support early language development in infants. And then As an observer of young infants, the second goal is to be able to interpret the actual early language behavior that infants produce, and that caregivers engage in the light of these developmental processes and milestones. And finally, the third goal is to be able to communicate these research findings to people that are invested in early infant language development. So these include parents and teachers, policymakers, and pediatricians. So in terms of coursework and evaluation, we're going to have online class discussions in Canvas within each module about different questions. And this course is cross-leveled, meaning that you can take this as for undergraduate credit or graduate credit. In both cases, the final project is going to be a sort of educational resource, something that you're going to develop. You're going to identify a topic and develop an accessible educational resource aimed at parents or teachers or pediatricians that describes the developmental processes and milestones in early communication development. So this is different than a paper that you're submitting to a professor where you're trying to demonstrate your own knowledge. Here, I want you to take the stance of trying to educate others. And for those who are taking this for graduate credit, there'll be an additional amplified, on top of this resource, there'll be an expanded annotated bibliography and research review where you're going to dig in a little bit more into the primary sources underlying your resource. So I invite you to contact me if you have any questions about the course. If you're interested and you'd like to find out more, you can reach me by email. I'm happy to talk with you. Thanks.